All right, welcome to Philosophy 221 and the week one recorded lecture. We're going to look at logic, and for this week, our topic is critical thinking and why it's important. So the aim of this lesson is to help you learn the basics of critical thinking and be able to identify some of the common barriers to effective critical thought. So hopefully you've looked at the introduction. I'm Cherish Condit. I'm your instructor. Hopefully we'll have some good personality here. I look forward to having you in class. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's a lot of good discussion. Be in the textbook, be reading the textbook, be familiar with the information, do the assignments, come prepared to think and prepared to discuss, and we'll have a really good class. So we're going to give the foundation for that by going over critical thinking and how we accomplish that, and we'll look at the assignments for this week and talk about what we're doing in the class, and then we will call it a day. So my goal is to get the information to you effectively but also efficiently. So the first thing we're going to look at here is understanding what it is. Critical thinking provides us with a set of skills we need to make decisions and resolve issues that arise in our everyday lives. So critical thinking, like logic, requires learning how to think rather than simply what to think. So the word critical is derived from the Greek word kritikos, which means discernment, the ability to judge, or decision making. So really like those words as we think about critical thinking, that we're really seeing what the issue is and really judging well and making good, solid decisions. So when we look at logic, logic is a crucial part of critical thinking. It requires good analytical skills. Logic is defined as the study of the methods and principles used in distinguishing correct, good arguments from incorrect, bad arguments. So critical thinking requires that we apply the rules of logic as well as gathering evidence surrounding an issue, evaluating it, coming up with a plan of action. So we'll gone over some films, looked at some logic, some applications of critical thinking, and really seen this in action and had an idea of what it is. But in the end, when we look at it, what we're asking is, am I just saying what I think, or do I know what I think? Have I followed those rules of logic? Do I have an evidence-based and logical reasoning behind my thought and my ideas in there? So logic versus opinion. Let's get a good view of that. In contrast to arguments based on logic, arguments based on opinion are defined as beliefs based solely on personal feelings rather than reasons or facts. So while we're all entitled to our opinions, arguments based solely on opinion are not necessarily reasonable. And they may encourage us to make poor choices or act in ways we may later regret. Sometimes uninformed opinions can be harmful, both to us and society. So we look at this. We sometimes have opinions that aren't based on any evidence, that aren't based on any logic. It's just what we think or how we feel, or it's based on a meme we once saw on Facebook, and we follow it as if that's evidence, and we spread it as if that's evidence, and we share it 50,000 times because it has this quote that says something really bad about the politician we don't like, and so we so want it to be true. But we don't take the time to see if it's logical, to research the discussion, and we just pass it on. But holding those beliefs are also difficult professionally and personally when we have our opinions just based on our own thought or based on something we heard once, instead of really understanding logic and evidence, and we feel or think something based on having really good premises for that conclusion or really good ideas for that. So we look at cognitive development in college students. There was an educational researcher, William Perry, who identified the stages of cognitive development, and he used college students because the traditional college student is right at that brimming adulthood time. But also for non-traditional college students, sometimes they're at a brimming intellectual discovery time. So they are first learning to really move into their own thought. And so he talks about going through the stages of dualism, relativism, and commitment. So stage one is dualism. And dualism is really common with younger students or new to critical thinking people. And this assimilation of knowledge basically in a very simple dualistic way. It's right or wrong, one way or the other. And they tend to have a lot of confirmation bias where they look for things to prove what they already believe. And what they already believe is often whatever they've been told to believe by whoever they see as the authority figure. So sometimes even in younger students' rebellion, because, oh, I don't think what my parents think. I am new age. I am revolutionary. I am progressive. In fact, I think exactly what my professor thinks. And so it's pretty much just the same thing again. So that's that dualism. And it comes from first branching away from our former authority figure and learning and attaching to a different one, but it does require that you reject a different authority figure and you look at right or wrong, one way or the other, and there is no gray. And then they do fall victim to that confirmation bias quite a bit. When we move into the next stage, oh, got a little cry. The next stage is relativism, and relativism, rather than accepting that ambiguity may be unavoidable, that sometimes there's that gray area, relativistic thinkers reject that right or wrong dualistic viewpoint completely and basically go to the opposite extreme, that to each his own, all truth is relative, everyone can be right because everybody's truth is whatever their own truth is, and if you feel like you can stand on the train tracks and the train won't hit you, then I guess that's fine for you. I mean, that's an extreme exaggeration, but it's that next stage, and you know those guys and you want to label them, you probably know his name. I always think that in a lot of these classes, your first thought is, oh my gosh, I know that guy. And then the next thing seems to be, oh my goodness, I am that guy. But in this is that next stage where everybody gets to be right because I'm so open-minded, I can accept everything. And it's great in theory, but it doesn't really work. And so all truth isn't necessarily just a matter of opinion, but that's this concept in this stage. So for them, the fact that you stated your opinion is enough. And they really look down on people challenging other opinions or, causing you to think or questioning because, hey, man, everybody can think whatever they want. The reality is that despite that outward relativism, they still look for the authority figures or like professors to confirm their opinions. They want the approval of their progressive opinion as well. So then that next stage, that final stage that you talked about, is commitment. So as students mature, we realize that not all thinking is equally valid. And that seems like the nicest possible way of saying some people just ain't got it going on upstairs. But they realize also that not only can authority figures be mistaken, that these amazing people weren't necessarily infallible, but a certain level of uncertainty, ambiguity, that gray area is really unavoidable. So at this stage, when students experience uncertainty, they make a decision to commit to their position based on the evidence that they've evaluated. That they realize it's not necessarily black and white, but they're choosing to be on their side because it matches the side they choose or their way of thinking because they made that decision based on the best evidence available. And at the same time, because they become independent thinkers, they really are open to challenge. And if more evidence comes along, or if someone has a better argument or experience teaches them something different, they really are flexible enough to change their position. And that really is a key part of being a good, strong, critical thinker, is being able to say, you know what, that's good evidence. I was wrong, I changed my mind. That isn't necessarily waffling or being blown around. It's the idea that when we look at critical thinking, it's the concept of knowing what you know and knowing how you know it, why you believe that. Because when you have a good, strong evidentiary foundation, when you know why you know it, then you can have discussions about it. You can look at opposing points because you feel solid in it. And so for me, when you get to that point where you're committing as a critical thinker, you've done a lot of the work already. You've looked at the evidence, you've had the experience, and you're committed to that. And so you're not threatened by other people sharing their ideas, and you don't have your mind changed, and you can have respectful discussions with people you disagree about or disagree with. And every once in a while, someone's going to give you new information or bring up a new point, and you're going to be able to say, my eyes are open wider now. And so I moved to a new opinion. I changed my mind because I have new information and new experience. And so that's a good thing for critical thinkers as well. So from that point, we look at some of the characteristics of a good critical thinker, and these are important for you for your assignment for this week. So look at these. Critical thinking is not a single skill, rather it is a collection of skills that enhance and reinforce each other. So these skills include analytical skills, which is your ability to analyze your beliefs and provide your logical support. Tell me what you know, why and how you know it. Your communication and literacy skills, huge one. Nobody cares how smart you are, and it won't really matter. If you cannot communicate that intelligently, people will assume you're not smart. And it's just true. So your ability to listen, to speak, to write effectively, and your awareness of your own communication style is huge, 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 huge part of being a good critical thinker. That's it. Yep, it comes down to spelling and grammar. So run your spell check and read it out loud to yourself so you make sure you make sense, and listen with the intent to understand and not necessarily with the intent to respond. And then being articulate and speaking well, it makes people listen and makes them trust. So you want to have those things as well. But also good critical thinkers have research and inquiry skills, ability to gather, evaluate, synthesize supporting evidence, and being able to create the path that they followed to get to their conclusion. They can research, they can ask questions, they can figure out evidence and find their way to what they believe, and explain it too is the next part of that. They also have flexibility and tolerance of ambiguity. And tolerance of ambiguity just means the ability to put up with a gray area. I can work without very, 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 very specific directions. The boss says something's done, I can figure it out on my own. If there's a gray area, I can handle that. I can work in the gray area. I can figure out in there. So that's what that high tolerance of ambiguity is. And flexibility means I can adapt. Things happen, you know, itineraries get messed up and you have to adjust, or something comes up at the last minute and you have to adjust, or somebody else's crisis gets in the way of your schedule and you have to adjust, and it'll work out. That flexibility to adapt to that, to work with that. But they also have an open-minded skepticism. And skepticism doesn't mean cynicism. It means questioning. So it's the ability to overcome their personal prejudices and biases and critically examine all sides of an issue before coming to a decision. Easier said than done. Often this involves a method of doubt. So Rene Descartes talked about this first. That it means we set aside our preconceptions and adopt a default position of skepticism. So our default is not a cynical or arrogant prove it, but, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'm going to find out if I can prove it. And we follow evidence to a conclusion rather than having a conclusion that we try to make evidence fit, because that doesn't work for critical thinking either. So good critical thinkers also have creative problem-solving skills. They can think outside the box. They can figure it out. They're part of a solution, not part of the problem. They don't run their whole life on memes. They have attentiveness, mindfulness, curiosity. Oddly enough, really good critical thinkers tend to be positive. I mean, they aren't sunshine and roses, head in the clouds all the time, but they have this idea that they can figure it out. And they definitely have collaborative learning skills. So they have the ability to recognize and anticipate other people's reactions, to accommodate that. They have a willingness and ability to recognize strengths in other people so they can collaborate effectively, they can share knowledge, they can work together. Because as a critical thinker, they're sure of what they know and they're sure of what they have to offer. And that's why they want to collaborate. They want to find those strongest collaborators in other people so we can work together for the best possible result. So those are some of the characteristics of good critical thinkers. But critical thinking and self-development, critical thinking isn't really just about abstract thought. We're not just sitting around in togas on the edge of the Parthenon saying words out loud and philosophizing. It's really about understanding yourself so you can be your best self. So you can, I love this phrase, so your whole development as a person. To be wholly developed, to that mind, body, spirit concept of self-examination is a huge part of critical thinking. What are my biases? What do I know? Do I follow evidence? Am I basing too much of my decisions on logic and not caring about emotion? Am I too much into decision making through emotions and not following actual evidence? We want to have that rational emotive approach. We'll talk about this a lot as we go through the class, but we want to look at logic and rationality first and foremost, and then check in with our emotions as well as that. But poor critical thinkers have a tendency to be controlled by circumstance. They deal really ineffectively with problems. They don't just live in crisis mode because of bad time management. They live in crisis mode because the world's out to get them. And that happens to varying degrees. For some people, it's the world's out to get me, it's not fair, it's who you know, and they never can get ahead, and everyone, my teacher hates me, whatever. And that's the problem. But also in subtle ways, where I just don't have good luck, so I can't try, or I believe what my fourth grade teacher told me, so I'm not good at that. And I don't make a plan because good enough, this is better than what I had before, and so it's enough. Whereas good critical thinkers, they take charge of their lives by choice. I love the phrase that good enough never is. And when I'm doing my best, all I can do is all I can do, and all I can do is enough, if it's really all I can do. My best is always good. But whenever I'm like, meh, I could do better, but good enough never is in the things that really matter for me. And so a lot of times we settle for a life that's better simply because it's not as bad as it was, or a relationship that's better because it's not as bad as the last one, or a job that's better because it's not as bad as the last one. That's not the same as good. If I used to eat 20 value meals every day for lunch, but now I eat 10 value meals every day for lunch, that's better, but that isn't good. And so good critical thinkers have that, where they take charge of their lives, they evaluate, they improve, they consider themselves as the driving force behind what happens to them. So they're the pilots of their own lives. A life plan, they have a flight plan. So some other features of good critical thinkers: effective critical thinkers exhibit other traits and characteristics that include the ability to challenge social injustices, as well as being able to respond intelligently and thoughtfully to challenges to our own belief systems. It doesn't bother me. I remember I responded to someone had made a derogatory comment toward a group of people that he felt was a majority, and he was like, those people again. And I responded with, sometimes your posts make me sad because they're so negative. That's it. It was a negative post. He said something negative about someone else. He responded with the longest diatribe of like, I am sorry if my post caused you to question your beliefs and where you come from. That's not, and I just had to laugh, because his threat to me and my foundation and my beliefs in that, simply because I said it was negative, was hilarious to me. But it also, the idea that I laughed and thought it was funny kind of reconfirmed my ideas, like, okay, I'm pretty good at critical thinking. So my response back was just, nope, didn't do any of those things. But those are some really interesting tools of rhetoric, not based on any sort of evidence, You made a negative comment. You said something negative about someone. So whether or not you think it's true, I'm still right. It was negative. But I'm good. And then, because I'm funny, I said, but if my reference to your thought being negative caused you to question your beliefs and where you come from, oh, me. It made me laugh. Um, but we can stand that. When you know what you know, and you know how and why you know it, and you have that strong foundation as a critical thinker, someone asks the question, questions your belief, challenges your beliefs, you can respond. You're not angry. You answer the question. You can let them know. And for me, sometimes I just say, I don't feel like you really want to have a discussion. I feel like you want to have a setup, and I don't need to debate because I'm not going to prove anything to you and you're not going to prove anything to me. So it's a waste of time and adding too much contention to the world. So no, but if you just want to know, we can talk about it. And I can do that. I don't need to fight or defend or throw in that way. But also, good critical thinkers' characteristics include the cultivation of high self-esteem. Cultivation, like a garden. We plant it, we grow it, we feed it, we water it, we tend to it. If we've neglected it for a while, we got to go back in and pull the weeds and fix it again. Proactiveness. We don't sit and wait for life to happen, we happen to it. Self-direction. Make a choice and move that way. I'm having a life lesson right now. But they have these traits are common in autonomous critical thinking, that I can think critically for myself. They also include involvement in democratic politics, the ability to critically analyze political actors and issues. And this is hard for people, especially when they get super partisan, or especially when we're in a situation like now where it's, I just don't want the other guy. And so we have at least it's better than. But the ability to have a civil and respectful conversation about things and with people whom you disagree with is a huge part of critical thinking and an amazing skill that seems to be getting less and less common these days. But sometimes you have to be able to say, yes, these are the negative qualities of something I support, but I think that the positive outweigh the negative. If we try to spit polish everything and make it look perfect, we undermine our own arguments. So, but critical thinkers have an involvement in that process because they're able to analyze those and add to that conversation. So some of the barriers to effective critical thinking. Effective critical thinking involves sharpening our resistance to these irrational or narrow-minded arguments. So we have to be able to recognize those, and being able to do that really does sharpen our skills. And so we need to have some strategies to overcome them. And a lot of that will be in the reading. You'll get more in depth as you go through the chapter of that as well. So some of these strategies, we're going to look at what those are, include a three-tiered model of thinking. So the process used in critical thinking can be broken down to 3 tiers or levels of experience, interpretation, and analysis. So experience is the foundational level of critical thinking. It involves firsthand experience as well as empirical facts that are derived from other sources. That's things we know are facts. We've learned it through experience our own, or we have read empirical, this is a fact. Interpretation involves making sense of our experience, what that means to us. And then we analyze that, raising our level, thinking critically about how we interpreted it, thinking critically about perspectives, thinking critically about the experiences that we've had and how those play out. Our resistance tends to happen in between interpretation and analysis, because sometimes we were wrong. The way we saw it wasn't the way it is. That person was shy, they weren't stuck up. You know, that guy didn't see us there, he wasn't actually trying to cut us off. That person was really preoccupied and didn't hear us say hi. She doesn't secretly hate us and plot against us. So that resistance in between our interpretation and analysis is where that problem shows itself up. So resistance happens because none of us likes to be wrong. And when we are challenged, we exhibit that resistance. So that's the use of immature defense mechanisms that are rigid, impulsive, maladaptive, and non-analytical. I love that they're immature defense mechanisms, and they are awesome. Oh, but resistance acts are as a barrier to effective critical thinking. So, types of resistance. They include avoidance, anger, cliches, denial, ignorance, conformity, struggling, and distraction. So we're going to talk about those, and we're going to move on and look at some other things that we're studying this week. So there are avoidance means escaping or intentionally avoiding certain people and situations because then we just don't have to talk about it. Anger involves responding to any challenges with threatening physical and verbal cues. Some of this part is where the fun part earlier was like, oh my gosh, I know that guy, gets to be the uncomfortable part where you're like, oh my gosh, I am that guy. Cliches are when we hide behind cliches, those off-repeated statements that sidetrack real issues, prevent effective critical thought, meme phrases, whatever. Those little like, there you go again, things that just basically sidetrack it. And then denial involves ignoring or refuting challenging viewpoints or evidence. Like, nuh-uh. It's basically grown up, nuh-uh. That's not happening. That's not real. Nope, I'm not having this discussion. Oh, good times. Ignorance is a type of resistance when we intentionally avoid learning about a particular issue so we don't have to have an opinion on it, so we don't have to talk about it, or so we don't have to be uncomfortable. Or getting to know a specific group of people so we can keep hating them. That's a barrier to critical thinking. Or we avoid learning about a specific idea or a specific ideology or a specific group because I want to keep believing what I believe so I can keep not liking that. Conformity involves just going along with the group or peer viewpoints even when you disagree with them. That's a resistance to critical thinking. Struggling involves getting caught up in the minute details of an issue so that nothing gets accomplished. I call it the Tuesday no it was Wednesday, where you're trying to get to the resolve, or say you're trying to tell somebody something difficult, like that you did that you don't want to have to tell them. You're like, well, it was last Tuesday and I was talking, nope, it was Wednesday. It was Wednesday. Anyway, so I was talking to, no, it was Tuesday. Or for me, sometimes when I need to get my life plan together, get my stuff done so I'm not, up in the wee hours of the morning planning classes, I get caught up in making sure the picture is just straight or making sure this other thing is just happening because I'm trying to avoid the thing I don't really want to do. But we also do that with critical thinking. And then distractions are hindrances that prevent clear thinking and effective critical analysis. We find ways to distract ourselves. We find people, we find addictions, we find vices, we find Netflix to keep us from having to really consider something. So like resistance, narrow-mindedness and rigid beliefs like absolutism, egocentrism, fear of change, ethnocentrism, and anthropocentrism all act as barriers to effective critical thinking. I'm going to briefly tell you what these are. Absolutism is a perspective that sees the world in black and white absolutes. Egocentrism is a perspective that sees the self as the center of all things, all you. A fear of challenge involves a reluctance to stand up to others we believe might have different opinions because we don't want them to challenge us. And sometimes people will be manipulative and inspire that in us by just attacking anybody who does challenge them. So it takes a little bit more courage. Ethnocentrism is an uncritical and unjustified belief in an inherent superiority of one's own group or culture. Lots of people suffer from that simply because they don't realize that culture isn't necessarily just ethnicity. It isn't just a regional culture. There's family culture. Do you ever get in a fight with a spouse or significant other because you do Christmas the right way and they do it the wrong way? Your family culture is, you've decided, is inherently superior to them. So you can have religious culture, you can have work culture, you can have family culture, so be careful with that one. And then anthropocentrism is a belief that humans are the central and most significant entity in the universe, which isn't necessarily right or wrong in these, but you have to be aware that it can make you look narrow-minded. If we're only looking at how everything affects humans, we might not see things that affect us that we didn't even realize, and then we basically tear down all the rainforests and now we're killing ourselves because, oops, we thought it didn't matter. Turns out it does. So you can see how even if you believe they are the center, being caught up in that in a narrow-minded way can actually backfire quite a bit. So we also want to watch out for rationalization and doublethink. So when we're faced with difficult choices or decisions, we engage in rationalization to justify our decisions made on the basis of personal opinion or bias. Let me tell you what I know. Good decisions, decisions you personally feel are in line with your own personal morality, don't have to be rationalized. When you're doing something you know is right, you don't have to rationalize to yourself why it's okay. You do it because you think it's right. So even though you have to tuck yourself into the right thing sometimes, you don't have to rationalize why you should do it. So I think of it like exercise, right? I might have to talk myself into a workout sometimes, but I don't ever have to tell me the reasons why I should and rationalize to myself why it's a good idea and why I really should do it. No, I don't need to. Right decisions don't need to be rationalized. So if you catch yourself trying to talk yourself into why you're an exception to something, you don't actually think it's a good idea. So be careful of that. Rationalization involves ignoring competing claims. People who engage in it get caught up in doublethink, and that's when you have two contradictory views at the same time. So you hold a double standard in your own head. So you believe both things are true. You think something is wrong, but you've rationalized all the reasons why you're not really doing that, like you think stealing is totally wrong, but you've rationalized that, you know what, I pay my taxes and this particular store did get a subsidy to buy it, so I guess I do kind of own this thing. That's where you get into that doublethink. I've heard it in a lot of other really awesome ways. I think one of my favorite was, no, adultery is totally wrong, but I was never really married in my heart, so okay. Do it or don't do it, but don't sell that to me. And then finally, we're looking at cognitive and social dissonance. So we're most likely to modify or critically analyze our views, look at our lives, check ourselves when we encounter cognitive or social dissonance. So when we encounter something in our mind and our thoughts that challenges us, that isn't in line, it feels uncomfortable. Like I've been doing A, and now I've run into something that says, no, B, and now I need to analyze it. Or social dissonance, which from the outside comes and says, no, A is wrong, analyze yourself. And so we do. So that's new ideas, new social behaviors, new perceptions that can contradict what we have felt and what we have thought and what our worldview was. And so we check that. So evidence suggests that when people change their behavior, changes in their beliefs follow. That's a double-edged sword. So that's why people say fake it till you make it, because it works. So if you're having, say, negative self-talk, you can behave as if you like yourself and your beliefs will change. But the reverse is also true. You cannot be saying in your belief system that I believe in this, I believe in being a good person, I believe in being faithful, I believe in any of those things, but behave in a different way, because eventually that behavior changes your beliefs to where, you know what, it's not, I believe this other thing, and it's so powerful. So we want to use this knowledge to change our behavior so we can have positive change in our beliefs, and be aware that whatever you're telling yourself in your head, if your behavior isn't matching it, your behavior is eventually going to change your mind. So be careful with that information. And then finally, for this chapter anyway, so what we explored in the previous slides, effective critical thinking requires development of a collection of skills, including attentiveness, open-mindedness, strong communication, analytical research, problem-solving skills. Critical thinkers also need to be aware of barriers to effective critical thinking, such as habitual use of resistance and different types of narrow-mindedness. So that is looking at this chapter. We're going to go over one of the other chapters from this week, and then I'll look at the assignment for this week. So we're looking at ethics and moral decision making as well. And we're going to go over this just kind of skim over it a little bit. We definitely want to read over it and skim over ethics and moral decision making. But just for the sake of time, to keep you within the time period. It is the information from the chapter, so you'll be fine as far as that goes. But really, perhaps no other area are people more prone to engage in rhetoric or resistance as when we have debates over moral issues. And rhetoric is really just the framing of the art of persuasion rather than following evidence. So we use rhetoric to persuade people. We say things in a fancy way. We base our arguments on being more persuasive rather than just having better evidence. And those issues are hard. We have meme wars instead of like really looking at evidence. So skills in critical thinking help us to evaluate moral issues from multiple perspectives, as well as break through patterns of resistance. So when we look at moral reasoning is when we make a decision about what we ought or ought not to do, about what our most reasonable position is, our policy for a particular issue. We have to have good critical thinking skills. We have to have familiarity with our own basic moral values and the motivating force behind our moral sentiments in order to have effective moral decision making. This means that when we have a sense of our own personal morality, so when we look at moral values, sometimes we label us or them on that, but the reality is everybody has their own morality. Some people's is higher than others, different than others, levels of others, different understanding of what it is. But there is an association between morality and staying within your own morality and happiness, a sense of well-being that's found in moral philosophies throughout the world. So having an idea of what your concept of right and wrong is, what your concept of your basic moral values are, and then staying true to that. That dissonance that we talked about before shows up when we behave differently from our own morality, and it creates unhappiness. So it's really hard is when that runs into pride as well, because then people are like, no, I am happy. Everything I do is great. And so I think of it like they tripped and fell in a big pile of crap. And because they were walking down a path they knew they shouldn't have been walking on. And then when they caught this, they're like, yep, I acted against my own morality, and so I fell in crap. Instead of standing up and saying, yep, I need to wash this off, they're like, oh, I love it. It's great for the skin. It's wonderful. I meant to do that. And everyone's like, we can see you. So you have to understand what your own morality is and act within that. So moral values are those that benefit yourself and others and are worthwhile for their own sake. They include altruism, compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, and injustice. As we look at this, we're going to look at non-moral values. Those are goal-oriented. That means there's a payoff: independence, prestige, fame, popularity, wealth. Americans tend to regard non-moral values such as career success, financial prosperity, all of these things as a means to happiness. This interesting fact: there is, in fact, little correlation between prosperity and happiness, except at the very lowest levels of income. So what that means is research has shown that money doesn't buy happiness. That once you have reached the minimum level of income, so once you have come out of poverty enough to have any type of food and shelter, that there is no more correlation between wealth and happiness. So basically, if you're just above that, you have the homeless, no food level. Once you come out of that poverty level, if you can't be happy working with what you have at that level, unfortunately, the outside solution of having more money won't change that happiness. That's what the research is showing, and probably your life experience would tell you as well. So when we fail to take appropriate moral action and make a decision we later regret, we commit what we call moral tragedy. These failures can be avoided through development of critical thinking skills that we talked about previously to enhance our moral reasoning. So when we look at conscience, a well-developed conscience, our little Jiminy Cricket, provides us with knowledge about what is right and wrong. So like language, whose basic structure is innate in us, our conscience is nurtured and neglected. It's shaped by our family, religion, and culture. It has an emotional element that motivates us. to act on our knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. And effective moral reasoning involves listening to the affective side of our conscience as well as the cognitive and reasoning side of our conscience. So when we look at what happens as we move through morals and moral reasoning, we have guilt too. Guilt is often broadly defined to include shame, but guilt and shame are very different. And I love how Brene Brown defines them. So guilt results when we commit a moral wrong or violate a moral principle, and shame, on the other hand, occurs as a result of a social norm, as a result of failure to live up to others' expectations. Guilt can be worthwhile. Guilt is like pain in the body. It says something's wrong, something needs to be fixed, something needs to be changed. It can be worthwhile. Shame, on the other hand, it destroys. It's a festering infection. You're not getting treated. So when Brene Brown defines it, she says, guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am bad. So guilt, I did something bad. I don't want to do that. I made a mistake. I need to fix it in the future. Shame, I am bad. It's a lost cause. So we want to understand those and how they affect us. Good critical thinkers, we distinguish between the two. We employ other skills, good listening, problem solving that can help us in our decision making so we can be more like Gandhi and make better decisions. So as you study this chapter and you look through morals and ethics with critical thinking, you'll look at a lot of different moral theories and a lot of different understanding, but just some tips on taking that information and integrating it into your processes. When you're evaluating and resolving moral dilemmas, you can follow several steps. And this is just basically a how to evaluate a moral dilemma. Describe the facts, list relevant moral principles and concerns, list and evaluate possible courses of action, devise a plan of action, carry out the plan of action. And that's pretty much it with that. So being able to recognize moral arguments and developing skills to evaluate moral reasoning are important factors in critical thinking. There is a positive correlation between the level of moral reasoning a person can do and their critical thinking ability. So you have to understand what your moral foundation is so that you can have a better moral reasoning and then think critically better. So effective critical thinking requires not only that we be aware of our own moral values, but also that we be open-minded and willing to respect the concerns and values of others. Okay, I just want to go over the work for this week here. For this week's first assignment is a critical thinking blog entry and response. You do not actually have to create a blog on the internet. You do not need to post this to a blog on the internet. So keep that in mind. So the first one, 250 words. The reason it's like a blog is so you can use your informal conversational tone. The first part of it is 250 words where you define the traits of a good critical thinker. So I'm going to open this up so we can see it just a little bit better. So if I edit it, I can move through it a little bit more easily. But we're going to define the traits of good critical thinkers. You will not be able to define all of them in only 250 words. That's not possible. So use this, pick out a couple of the traits of good critical thinkers and define those. Okay? And pick out a couple of the barriers to critical thinking and define those. And then in the second piece, it's 250 words, you're going to respond to one of these pretend comments, and I'll show you where they are. Where say someone read, it's pretending that someone read your blog and then ask a question, and now you're going to answer their question. So you get to choose from one of the four. You can choose the one to your program, but if you like one of the other ones, that's fine. Put 250 words on one page, page break, 250 words on the second page. Same Word document, submit it in there. So this is down here, piece 1 explains it again, piece 2, there's your assignment requirements. And then right here is just those questions. So it's basically you make your first post, hey, it's cool, everybody. Hey, readers, just want to talk about critical thinking. A couple of the traits of good critical thinkers are this and this, and here's why this is important, here's why that's important. But there's also barriers. 250 words doing that. Then you read one of these questions, 250 words answering it. Got it? Good. So for this week's discussion, we're doing critical thinking and moral reasoning. So you're going to watch it. It's kind of cheesy little video um, about critical thinking in the workplace. Read through this, answer the questions. Read through the description of the assignment. There is a word count. There are questions to answer. There are things to add to that to make it an effective discussion post that fits within the parameters of the assignment. But additionally, remember it's a college assignment. Run a spell check. Read it through out loud. Make sure it makes sense. Post that as early as you can so people can respond to it. So that's the information you need for week 1. I look forward to having an excellent class. I'm really excited to be in class with you. That's my contact information. You can call me in my office, leave a message. That voicemail will be forwarded to my email. You can send me an email and I'll have contact with that. And good luck with your assignments, and I will see you in class.